CCP's Deception of the World. Hello everyone, it's Michael here. People living outside China may not have heard of the name Norman Bethune, but in China, almost everyone knows of him. Do you know why? This is our story. For many Chinese, the name Norman Bethune is very well known. This is because during the Cultural Revolution, everyone in China had to recite by heart 3 articles written by Mao Zedong. One of them is named in memory of Bethune. According to Mao, Bethune was a noble, pure and moral person who benefited the people. However, was Bethune really such a person? Bethune was born in 1890 in Gravenhurst, Ontario, Canada. Both his great-grandfather and father were Christian Presbyterian ministers, and even Bethune's former home was built by the local Christian church for ministers. His mother was also a devout Presbyterian missionary, distributing Christian pamphlets in her native city London at the age of 10, and left England at the age of 21 to serve as a missionary in Hawaii, where she met Bethune's father. The family of 2 devout Christians brought untold love to Bethune. They had an extraordinary influence on him. "My mum gave me an evangelist character," said Bethune, "and my dad gave me a fervent drive to act." In other words, Bethune grew up in an environment surrounded by God and traditional Western culture. As a graduate from the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine, Bethune went on to become a clinical postgraduate and doctor at the Royal Victoria Hospital. During his time at medical school, Bethune invented the artificial pneumothorax therapy, which he experimented on himself with success. In addition, he invented 22 surgical instruments, including the Bethune rib shears, which were at the forefront at the time. It can be said, at the time, Bethune was a competent and dedicated doctor. Phoenix, The Life of Norman Bethune, a book written by a Canadian expert on Bethune, historian Roderick Stewart, together with his wife Sharon Stewart, provides a vivid account of the other side of this protagonist. In addition to being an excellent doctor, he was, however, also a womanizer and a violent man. In their book there was such a story. In 1923, Bethune became a clinical postgraduate at the Royal Victoria Hospital. By then he had met Frances Campbell Penny, a Scottish girl who was 11 years younger than him. Despite their drastically different personalities, under Bethune's stubborn and crazy pursuit, on the 13th of August of the same year, Frances decided to disregard her family's objections and marry Bethune in London, England. In 1926, Bethune was ill with tuberculosis. Convinced that he was about to die, Bethune forced his wife to divorce him. "I will never go to a sanatorium for treatment unless you agree to divorce me," said Bethune. It's difficult for us to find out why Bethune forced Frances to divorce him, but according to a short film provided by Bethune's former residents, Bethune was living a rather debauched life at that time, drinking heavily, smoking, and attending various parties at night, and living a rather unrestrained life. In the autumn of 1929, after recovering from his illness, Bethune begged his ex-wife in Scotland to come back to him. Later they remarried in Montreal. However, soon after their marriage once again had reached a dead end. There is such a description in the book. One morning before going to work, Frances asked her husband to buy some meat and vegetables so she can cook a few nice dishes for him later. In the afternoon, Frances returned home with great interest. When she entered their home, she saw her husband sitting on the floor intently studying a skeleton. She asked, "Have you bought the meat and vegetables?" Without thinking, her husband said, "It's in the fridge." She opened the fridge and saw only a section of intestine. She frowned and cupped the intestine and said, "You just bought this crap?" Her husband jumped and shouted, "Don't move, that's human intestine." Frances cried out in horror and threw it away. "How can you put a dead man's intestine with our food?" But Bethune said without looking up, "What's the big deal? Aren't all the beef, mutton, and pork you eat the organs of dead animals?" Encounters like this one happened several times until Frances couldn't stand it anymore. In March 1931, Frances filed for divorce once again after 2 years of remarriage. In 1935, the trajectory of Bethune's life changed. He attended the International Congress of Physiology in Moscow, USSR, and having learned about the medical and health benefit system introduced by the Soviet Communist Party, which seemed to agree with what he had in mind, he returned home and immediately joined the Communist Party of Canada, where he vigorously promoted for national health care. However, ironically, during his visit to the Soviet Union, he was unaware that Stalin was conducting a purge, slaughtering large numbers of civilians and communists, including most of the Soviet Communist Party Central Committee members and senior generals in the Soviet Army. When the Civil War broke out in Spain in September 1936 between the German-Italian Nazi-backed Francisco Franco and the Soviet-backed left-wing government, Bethune organized a medical team to go to Madrid as a member of the Canadian Communist Party to support the left-wing regime. There he set up the first mobile blood transfusion station in history. However, owing to his own doings, such as indulging in sexual behavior, alcoholism, bad temper, and inability to work with others, he was later expelled back to Canada in May 1937. After the Marco Polo Bridge incident on July 7, 1937, a full-scale resistance against the Japanese invasion broke out in China. Bethune raised another $5,000 from the Communist Party of the United States, bought a batch of medical instruments, and was sent to China by the joint American and Canadian Communist Party, and arrived in January 1938. His life journey began to take a turn from then on. At the time, the nationalist government of China were on the front lines fighting against the Japanese invasion, committing almost the entire regular army to the war. Many medical volunteers from all over the world came to help the nationalist army, but Bethune, unlike the other volunteers, was determined to help the Chinese Communist Party, who were nowhere near the front lines, and hid in Yan'an to gather its strength. A few months later, arranged by several Chinese Communist Party members such as Tao Xingqi, Song Qingling, Liao Chengzhi, and Zhou Enlai, a medical team of Canadian and American doctors led by Bethune arrived in Yan'an. They were personally welcomed by Mao Zedong, who appointed Bethune as a health advisor to the Jinchaji military region of the 8th Route Army. For the Communist Party of China, who was still weak at that time, it was a great joy to have a highly skilled doctor like Bethune. In 1.5 years, from March 1938 to November 1939, Bethune made a great contribution to the Chinese Communist Party. Not only did Bethune perform a large number of surgical operations to save numerous wounded, but he also founded a medical school, trained a large number of medical personnel, and wrote a variety of war medical teaching materials. Out of the lascivious nature of the Chinese Communist Party, as a reward for foreign support, the CCP arranged temporary wives and sexual partners for foreigners working in Yan'an. The only exception to this was Bethune, who refused to have an arranged temporary wife and preferred to drink and visit rural brothels. On one occasion, while waiting for a boat ride to cross the Yellow River, people couldn't find Bethune anymore. They were all anxious about his disappearance. Later, with the help of a Canadian priest, Luo Mingyuan, who practiced medicine in the local area, the drunken Bethune was found in a rural brothel and was brought back. In late October 1939, while taking care of a wounded man, Bethune's left middle finger was cut by a scalpel and got infected. Later it led to sepsis, and Bethune died in November at the age of 49 after ineffective treatment. Of course, Bethune's death was an important loss to the Chinese Communist Party, which was the main reason why Mao praised him so highly. Looking back, we can clearly see the turning point in his life. Whoever aligned with the evil Chinese Communist Party was doomed from the start, often ending in tragedies. Little is known about the many Canadian Christian missionaries who served in medical and educational work in China during the time of national crisis for the Chinese people, most of whom served under the national government and in the areas of the Japanese occupation. Of course, after the Communist Party took power, it tried to erase the good deeds done during the rule of the nationalist government and tried to portray the Communists as the main force in combating Japan. So naturally, the touching stories of international missionaries working under the nationalist governments had not been told to the Chinese people in the same way as the publicity given to Bethune. Their great contribution to saving the lives of Chinese people should be justly commemorated from the standpoint of love, justice, and humanity, and not just Dr. Bethune alone out of political needs. Dr. Isabel McTavish, born in 1881 in Manitoba, was one of the Canadian missionaries. At the age of 24, she was sent to China by the Presbyterian Church of Canada. This young doctor worked for more than 30 years in Weihui and Anyang in Henan province, and remained unmarried for the rest of her life. Her service to the Chinese people was 20 times longer than that of Bethune. During the war, Dr. McTavish was detained and brutally treated by the Japanese and was only released to Canada after the war was over. Dr. Victoria Chung, also known as Zhang Xiaobai, was the first female doctor of Asian descent in Canada. She was sent by the Presbyterian Women's Missionary Society of Canada to work at the Barclay Maternity and Children's Hospital in Jiangmen, Guangdong, also known as the Renji Hospital, the predecessor of the present Jiangmen Central Hospital. She is fondly remembered by several generations of the Jiangmen people. Fortunately, Dr. Chung passed away on the eve before the 10-year catastrophe of the Cultural Revolution, and did not have to experience the horrors of the revolution. On the day of her funeral, people from all villages in Jiangmen rushed to pay their respects to Dr. Chung, and the procession stretched for kilometers. By comparison, Bethune was not in any way a noble man, a pure man, a moral man, a man free of low taste, as Mao says, nor was he a man of benefit to the people, but rather a man of benefit to the Chinese Communist Party. While the Chinese people were fighting a bloody war under the leadership of the nationalist government, the Chinese Communist Party was cowering in Yan'an far from the front lines of the war, taking the opportunity to strengthen itself, raise its international image, and prepare for the eventual seizure of power. It is no wonder why the Canadian communist Norman Bethune became a heroic and exemplary figure of the Chinese Communist Party. We'll continue our story in the next episode. Please like and subscribe to our channel, and see you next time.